The world ended in a scream. One moment, Sarah Jenkins was pressing two fingers to a man's carotid artery, the rhythmic beat a familiar, reassuring drum against the cacophony of a Tuesday night in the ER. The next, the floor bucked like a wild animal. A violent, guttural roar tore through the hospital's foundations, and the solid, dependable world she knew dissolved into a maelstrom of terror. The ceiling light above her exploded in a shower of glass and sparks, plunging her corner of the ER into a disorienting darkness. The man on the gurney, his complaint of chest pains suddenly a forgotten whisper, was thrown sideways. Sarah's own body became a rag doll slammed against a supply cart with a force that knocked the air from her lungs. Metal screeched, glass shattered, and the screams of patients and staff became a single unified shriek of primal fear. It was a sound she would never forget. Dust, thick and chalky, billowed from collapsing ceiling tiles, instantly clogging her throat. For a few seconds that stretched into an eternity, the only reality was the violent, bone-jarring shudder of the building and the symphony of destruction around her. Then, as abruptly as it began, the shaking stopped. An eerie, profound silence followed, broken only by the distant wail of a car alarm and the soft, whimpering cries that began to emerge from the darkness. Sarah lay on the floor, her cheek pressed against the cold, gritty linoleum, her ears ringing. A warm trickle of blood snaked its way down her temple. She took a breath, coughed out a cloud of dust, and pushed herself up. Her training, a decade of controlled chaos and high-stakes decisions, kicked in like a drug. "Anybody hurt?" Her voice was raspy, but it cut through the terrified quiet. A few shaky yeses answered her. Using the faint, flickering light of a battery-powered backup monitor, she took in the scene. The ER looked like a war zone. Gurneys were overturned, vital equipment was smashed, and a web of cracks snaked across the far wall. But there was no time for shock, there was only the work. "Ben!" she yelled, searching for the young resident who'd been by her side moments before. "Here," a voice called out, shaky but present. "I'm okay." "Good. Get your phone out, use the flashlight. We start with the ones who aren't making any noise." It was the brutal, unwritten rule of mass casualty events. The silent ones were either okay, or they were beyond help. As Ben's small beam of light cut through the gloom, the true scale of the immediate disaster became horrifyingly clear. The deluge began just minutes later. The first wave was the walking wounded, stumbling in from the street, their faces masks of disbelief, covered in a ghostly layer of dust and blood. Then came the sirens, a rising chorus of despair. As ambulances began to arrive, their bays quickly overwhelmed. Firefighters and paramedics, their own faces grim with shock, started carrying in the more seriously injured on backboards, on makeshift stretchers, on anything they could find. The hospital's backup generators kicked in, casting the ER in a harsh, humming, fluorescent light that did little to dispel the atmosphere of dread. It only illuminated the horror in greater detail. Sarah became a whirlwind of focused energy, a general commanding a battered army. Her scrubs were already stained with blood, some of it her own, most of it not. Her mind, sharpened by adrenaline, processed the chaos, triaging patients with a chilling efficiency. A man with a piece of rebar through his leg was tagged red. A woman with a broken arm was tagged green. A child, silent and pale, was tagged black. She didn't have time to grieve. She couldn't afford to feel. It was in this maelstrom, nearly 2 hours after the initial quake, that they brought him in. Two construction workers, their own faces streaked with grime, had found him in the rubble of a collapsed office building. He was unconscious, laid out on a piece of plywood. His face was a mess of blood and dust, a deep gash on his forehead oozing blood. He had no wallet, no phone, nothing. Another John Doe in a sea of them. Sarah intercepted them, her eyes quickly scanning his still form. His breathing was shallow, his pulse thready. "Over here," she commanded, directing them to an empty bay, a small island of relative calm she had managed to clear. As they transferred him to a gurney, her hands flew over his body, assessing, diagnosing. The head wound was bad, but it was his pupils that sent a jolt of alarm through her. One was blown wide, the other a pinpoint, a classic sign of a severe intracranial bleed. Pressure was building inside his skull, crushing his brain. He didn't have hours, he had minutes. "Ben!" she yelled again. "Get me a head CT now!" Ben, his face pale and his eyes wide, shook his head. "The machine's down. The tremor knocked it offline." Sarah's heart sank. She looked around, her eyes landing on Dr. Marcus Thorne, the chief of emergency medicine. He was standing near the nurse's station, barking into a phone, his pristine white coat a stark contrast to the grime covering everyone else. He wasn't treating patients. He was managing the crisis, which to him meant managing the hospital's liability. "Dr. Thorne," she called, rushing over to him. "I have a John Doe with a probable epidural hematoma. Unilateral fixed and dilated pupil. He needs a burr hole right now or he's going to die." Thorne gave her a dismissive glance, his focus still on his phone call. "Jenkins, look around you. We have 50 critical patients and a line out the door. The on-call neurosurgeon is stuck across town. Get him stable and wait." "There is no waiting," Sarah insisted, her voice rising with an urgency that bordered on insubordination. "His brain is herniating. I can do the procedure. I've assisted on it a dozen times." Thorne finally ended his call, turning his full, condescending attention to her. His eyes flickered over her disheveled appearance with disdain. "You are a nurse, Jenkins. You will not be drilling holes into a patient's skull in my ER. That's an order. Now, get back to work before I have you written up for insubordination." He turned his back on her, dismissing her as if she were a buzzing fly. Sarah stood frozen for a second, a hot, white rage building in her chest. She looked from Thorne's arrogant back to the gurney, where the John Doe was lying, his life slipping away with every tick of the clock. She saw the monitor, his heart rate dropping, his blood pressure plummeting. In that moment, a career's worth of frustration with bureaucracy, with ego, with a system that so often put policy before patients, coalesced into a single, clear decision. Screw him. Screw the rules. She strode back to the bay. "Ben," she said, her voice low but firm, imbued with a confidence she didn't feel. "Get me the emergency craniotomy tray, now." Ben hesitated, his eyes darting nervously towards Thorne. "Sarah," he said. "I know what he said," she cut him off, her gaze locking onto his. "And I'm saying that man is going to die in the next 10 minutes if we don't do this. Are you going to help me save his life, or are you going to help Thorne fill out the paperwork on his corpse?" The young resident looked at the dying man, then back at the fierce determination in Sarah's eyes. He swallowed hard and gave a single decisive nod. He rushed to the supply room. Sarah took a deep, steadying breath. She was crossing a line, and she knew it. This was her job, her license, her entire future on the line for a man whose name she didn't even know. But as she picked up the sterile drill, its weight both terrifying and righteous in her hand, she knew it was the only choice she could make. The world had fallen apart, and the old rules no longer seemed to apply. There was only life and there was death, and she would be damned if she let bureaucracy make that choice for her. She leaned over the John Doe, whispered a silent prayer, and began to drill. The next 48 hours bled into a single, continuous nightmare. A marathon of human misery fueled by stale coffee and sheer, bloody-minded willpower. Time ceased to have meaning, marked only by the relentless tide of suffering that washed through the ER doors. Day bled into night and back into day, the only difference being the quality of light. The harsh, artificial glow of the hospital versus the hazy, smoke-filled gray of the outside world. Sarah moved through the chaos like a ghost, her body a machine running on fumes. Her initial adrenaline rush had long since faded, replaced by a deep, bone-aching exhaustion. Her mind was a fog, yet her hands remained steady, her training a deeply ingrained muscle memory. She sutured a gash on a firefighter's arm, her stitches neat and precise. She coached a young mother through a terrifying premature birth, delivering a tiny, perfect baby into a world of rubble. She held the hand of an elderly man as he took his last breath, his wife's photograph clutched in his other hand. She was a healer, a comforter, a confessor. And she was breaking. The John Doe she had operated on, her John Doe, had miraculously stabilized. He was alive, a testament to her reckless gamble. He was still unconscious, a silent figure in the corner of the chaotic ER, but his vitals were strong. She found herself checking on him compulsively, a small, irrational anchor in the storm. He was her victory, her one defiant success against the overwhelming tide of failure and death. That victory, however, had come at a steep price. Dr. Thorne now watched her with the predatory stillness of a hawk. He couldn't fire her, not in the middle of the biggest disaster the city had ever seen. But he could make her life a living hell. And he did, with a petty, sadistic precision. "Jenkins!" he called out, his voice sharp enough to cut through the din. "That woman in bed 12 needs her bandages changed, and the man in the hallway needs a bedpan. You're on cleanup duty." He was deliberately assigning her the most menial tasks, trying to humiliate her, to reduce her from a life-saving maverick to a glorified janitor. Her colleagues shot her sympathetic glances, but no one dared to speak up. Thorne's authority in the wake of the quake was absolute. Later, when she requested morphine for a teenage boy with a compound fracture, Thorne shook his head, a smug little smile playing on his lips. "We're running low, Jenkins. Have to conserve it for the most critical cases." Sarah knew it was a lie. She had seen the supply logs. He was punishing her patients to get at her. The boy's whimpers of pain were a knife in her gut. The rage bait, as it would later be called by an outraged public, wasn't just confined to Thorne. It was systemic, a rot that the earthquake had exposed. Sarah watched in disbelief as Officer Miller, a cop with a gut that spilled over his duty belt and eyes that were permanently bored, sauntered into the ER. She approached him, desperate for help. "Officer, we had a man come in here and steal a box of antibiotics. We need them, desperately. He ran down that hallway." Miller sighed, a long, theatrical exhalation of pure apathy. He didn't even look in the direction she was pointing. "Lady," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I've got reports of looting all over the city. People are dying out there. I don't have time to chase down your Tylenol." "It wasn't Tylenol, it was Cipro," she shot back, her voice rising. "People will die of sepsis." "File a report," he mumbled, already turning away, his attention caught by a news crew setting up their cameras outside. He was more interested in getting his face on TV than in doing his job. The feeling of helplessness was suffocating. The very people who were supposed to help, to maintain order, were just another part of the problem. But the most infuriating, soul-crushing moment came in the form of the Wellhauser family. They swept into the ER not with the fear and desperation of the other victims, but with an air of supreme, unassailable entitlement. Mr. Wellhauser, a man whose tailored suit was somehow still immaculate, was a major hospital donor. His wife was draped in jewelry that could have funded the ER for a month. Their son, a boy of about 16, was complaining of a twisted ankle. While dozens of people with life-threatening injuries lay on the floor, in hallways, on makeshift beds, the Wellhausers demanded and received immediate attention. Administrator Reynolds, a weaselly man with a perpetual sheen of sweat on his bald head, materialized at their side, his face a mask of obsequious concern. "Of course, Mr. Wellhauser. We'll get you into a private room immediately," Reynolds cooed, snapping his fingers at a nurse. "Get a wheelchair for the boy. And page Dr. Evans, the head of orthopedics." Sarah, who was trying to keep a man from bleeding to death with nothing but gauze and direct pressure, watched the scene unfold with a sense of surreal horror. She saw them being ushered into a clean, quiet room, a room that could have held 4 or 5 of the critical patients languishing in the hallway. That was the final straw. She left her patient in the care of a stunned intern and marched over to Reynolds, her exhaustion-fueled rage making her reckless. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice low and shaking. "People are dying out here, and you're giving a private room to a kid with a sprain?" Reynolds' pleasant demeanor vanished, replaced by a cold, reptilian glare. "This family is a cornerstone of this hospital's financial stability," he hissed. "Their comfort is a priority. You are a nurse. You are a cog in this machine. Now get back to your station before I make sure you never work in this city again. Know your place." Defeated, she turned away, the injustice a bitter acid in her stomach. She felt a hand on her arm. It was Maria, her friend, her rock. Maria's face was a mirror of her own fatigue and disgust. "Don't let them break you, Sarah. she whispered. "You're the best of us." Later that night, during a rare lull in the chaos, Sarah found herself by the John Doe's bedside. He was awake now, his blue eyes cloudy with confusion. He had amnesia. He didn't know his name, where he was from, or how he had ended up in this nightmare. He was grumpy, demanding, and complained incessantly about the noise, the food, the scratchy blanket. He was, in short, a terrible patient. But for some reason, Sarah didn't mind. She found his cantankerous nature almost refreshing. He was the only person in this whole mess who was treating her like a normal person, not a hero or a pariah. She brought him a cup of water and found herself lingering. "You look tired," he said, his voice raspy. It wasn't a complaint, just an observation. Sarah let out a short, humorless laugh. Tired doesn't even begin to cover it. She sank onto the stool beside his bed, the weight of the last 36 hours pressing down on her. And then she started to talk. She told him everything, about Thorne's ego, about the useless cop, about the Wellhousers and their sprained ankle, about Reynolds and his threat. She vented all her frustration and despair to this stranger, this blank slate. He listened intently, his gaze never leaving her face. When she was done, a long silence hung between them. "They sound like fools," he finally said, his voice rough but clear. "In my world, you cut out the dead weight. You eliminate inefficiencies. These men, this Thorne and this Reynolds, they are inefficiencies." Sarah smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "I wish it were that simple." "Why isn't it?" he asked, a flicker of something sharp and analytical in his eyes. It was in that moment that Maria walked by. She glanced at the patient, then did a double take at his wrist. His arm was draped over the side of the gurney, and on it was a watch. It was a sleek, minimalist device with a dark, glowing face. "Hey," Maria said, pointing. "Is that a Vance watch? The new V7 prototype? My son is obsessed with them. I thought they weren't even out yet." Sarah glanced at the watch. It did look expensive, futuristic. "I don't know," she mumbled, her mind too foggy to process the information. "He came in with it." "Crazy," Maria said, shaking her head. "Those things are supposed to cost more than my car. Wonder how a guy like this got one." She shrugged and moved on. Sarah looked back at her patient. He was watching her, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. The name, Vance, tickled the edges of her memory, but she couldn't place it. She was too tired to think, too tired to connect the dots. She just saw a man who needed her help, a man who, for some reason, made her feel a little less alone in the wreckage of her world. The breaking point came, as it so often does, not with a roar, but with a gasp. A small, desperate gasp for air from a 7-year-old girl named Lily. She had been brought in by her frantic mother, her small body racked with a severe asthma attack triggered by the dust and smoke that choked the city. Her lips were turning blue. "I need a nebulizer with albuterol, now!" Sarah yelled, her voice raw. A young nurse, her face pale with panic, shook her head. "We're out. The last vial was used an hour ago. The pharmacy is a wreck. We can't get to the main supply." A cold dread washed over Sarah. She knew this was a death sentence. Lily's wheezing was getting fainter, her chest barely moving. Then a thought struck her, a flash of pure, unadulterated rage. The Wellhousers, the disaster tourists in their private, pristine room. She knew with an instinct born of years in the ER that people like that didn't travel without their own private pharmacy. She didn't hesitate. She ran. She burst into their room without knocking. Mr. Wellhauser was on his phone, barking at what sounded like a stockbroker. His wife was filing her nails. Their son was playing a game on a tablet, his sprained ankle propped up on a pillow. On the bedside table sat a large leather medical kit. "I need albuterol," Sarah said, her voice dangerously calm. "Your kit. Now." Mrs. Wellhauser looked up, her expression one of utter disdain. "I beg your pardon? This is a private room." "Yeah." "There's a little girl dying right now because she can't breathe," Sarah said, taking a step closer. "I know you have what she needs in that bag. Give it to me." "Absolutely not," Mr. Wellhauser said, finally getting off his phone. "We might need it. This is our private supply. It was the sheer, unblinking selfishness of the statement that finally shattered the last of Sarah's control. But before she could lunge for the bag, Dr. Thorne appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. "Jenkins! What is the meaning of this? You are harassing my patients!" he boomed, his face turning a blotchy red. He physically moved to block her path to the medical kit. "Get out! Now!" "There's a child, Marcus!" she screamed, all pretense of professionalism gone, replaced by a raw, primal fury. "A child is dying, and you're protecting them? I am protecting this hospital from a lawsuit!" he roared back. "You are out of control!" "I'm out of control?" She laughed, a wild, unhinged sound. "You're the one who let a man steal our antibiotics. You're the one who is hoarding pain medication. You are not a doctor. You are a monster in a white coat, and you are going to stand there and let a little girl die to protect your precious donors." The entire ER, it seemed, had fallen silent. Everyone was watching. In that moment of high drama, as Reynolds came scurrying down the hall, his face a thundercloud, ready to have Sarah physically thrown out, a quiet voice cut through the tension. "That's enough." All heads turned. The voice had come from the John Doe's bay. He was sitting up, his back straight. The foggy confusion in his eyes was gone, replaced by an icy, piercing clarity. He looked at Thorne, at Reynolds, at the Wellhousers, and a flicker of something cold and dangerous passed across his face. Just then, a group of people in expensive suits, led by a severe-looking woman with a tablet, bustled into the ER, their clean, orderly presence a stark contrast to the surrounding chaos. They made a beeline for the John Doe's bed. "Mr. Vance, thank God," the woman said, her voice filled with relief. "We've been trying to reach you for 2 days." A collective gasp went through the room. The name this time landed with the force of a physical blow. Vance, Elias Vance, the tech billionaire, the reclusive genius, the man whose face was famous for being unknown, who was worth more than most small countries. Elias Vance ignored his anxious-looking team. He slowly, deliberately swung his legs over the side of the gurney. He stood up, a little unsteadily at first, and pointed a finger directly at Dr. Thorne. "I remember everything," he said, his voice quiet, yet it carried across the entire ER. "I remember you telling this nurse to let me die. I remember you hoarding supplies. I remember you, Reynolds, groveling before this." He gestured dismissively at the Wellhousers. "This waste of oxygen, while people suffered in the hallway. I've been your John Doe for 48 hours, and I have seen everything." Thorne and Reynolds stared, their faces turning from red to a pasty, corpse-like white. The Wellhousers looked like they had seen a ghost. Elias's gaze softened as it fell on Sarah. "And I remember you," he said, his voice now filled with a profound respect. "I remember you saving my life when he told you not to. I remember you fighting for every single person in this room, even when your own bosses tried to stop you." He turned back to the stunned crowd, his voice regaining its steel edge. "This nurse, this hero, just asked for medicine to save a dying child. And you," he jabbed his finger at Thorne, "denied her." He pulled the sleek, futuristic phone from the hand of his lead lawyer. With a few taps of his thumb, he unleashed hell. "Get me the mayor," he said into the phone. "Then get me the governor. Then get me Sarah Jensen at the New York Times." He looked up, his eyes sweeping over the terrified faces of the men who had tormented Sarah. "I am going to sue this hospital for a sum that will make your grandchildren weep. And then," he paused, letting the words hang in the air, "I'm going to buy it, and I'm going to burn it to the ground and build a new one in its place, one where the healers are allowed to heal." He ended the call and walked over to the Wellhousers' room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He simply took the leather medical kit from the bedside table, turned, and handed it to Sarah. "Go save that little girl," Elias Vance said softly. "Your shift is over." In the weeks that followed, the city began the slow, arduous process of healing, and so did Sarah. The story of the heroic nurse and the secret billionaire became a modern-day legend, a viral sensation that shone a harsh, unforgiving light on the cracks in the American healthcare system. It was the ultimate human interest rage bait story, and the public devoured it. Dr. Thorne and Administrator Reynolds were fired, their careers ending in a firestorm of public disgrace and a blizzard of lawsuits. The Wellhauser family became pariahs, their name a synonym for callous privilege. Officer Miller was suspended pending an internal investigation. The old guard had fallen. Elias Vance was true to his word. He didn't just sue the hospital, he bought it. And he didn't burn it down. Instead, he began to rebuild it from the inside out. He established a new board, a new mission, a new philosophy. He met with Sarah in a quiet coffee shop a month after the quake. The city outside was still a landscape of recovery, the sounds of construction a constant hum. Sarah was exhausted, still processing the trauma and the sudden, disorienting fame. She had been offered interviews, book deals, a lifetime of talking head appearances. She had turned them all down. "I have a proposal for you," Elias said, his demeanor softer, more thoughtful than the cantankerous amnesiac she had first met. The ordeal had changed him, cracked open the cynical shell he had built around himself. "I'm not interested in being the face of your new PR campaign," she said tiredly. He smiled, a rare, genuine expression. "Good, because I'm not interested in a PR campaign. I'm interested in building the best damn hospital in this country. A place where the bottom line is human life, not profit margins. A place where a nurse like you is celebrated, not punished, for having a conscience." He slid a set of blueprints across the table. "I want you to run the new ER, not just as a head nurse, but as its director. You'll have final say on staffing, on policy, on equipment. You'll have a blank check. Build it from the ground up, the way you know it should be." Sarah stared at the blueprints, then at the man across from her. It was an insane, overwhelming offer. She was a nurse, not an administrator. But then she thought of Lily, the little girl whose life she had saved. She thought of all the patients she had lost, not to their injuries, but to the system. She thought of the sense of utter powerlessness she had felt for her entire career. This was a chance to change that, a chance to build something better from the ashes. "Okay," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Okay, Elias, let's get to work." The final scene is not one of drama or chaos, but of quiet promise. 6 months later, Sarah stands on a steel girder, a hard hat on her head, looking out over the sprawling construction site. The frame of the new Elias Vance Emergency and Trauma Center is rising against the city skyline. It is a symbol of rebirth, not just for the city, but for her. She is no longer the burnt-out, cynical nurse, but a leader, her face filled with a new, hard-won confidence. She holds a rolled-up blueprint in her hand not as a weapon or a shield, but as a tool to build the future. The sun is setting, casting a warm, golden light over the scene. The longest shift of her life was over, but her real work, the work of healing a broken system, one patient, one policy, one act of compassion at a time, had just begun. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt a profound sense of hope.